Good evening and welcome to Arizona Illustrated for Monday, September 3rd, 2012. I'm Tony Paniagua. Happy Labor Day to all of you. Millions of people across the country are concerned about the obesity epidemic in the United States, which can lead to other medical conditions such as diabetes. This disease has traditionally been treated with medicine, but new studies are indicating that weight loss surgery may provide a valuable weapon to fight this battle. Not only can patients lose weight, but their diabetes may improve or disappear altogether. Christopher Conover has an interview with a surgeon from the University of Arizona Medical Center.
Dr. Galvani, thank you so much for coming in.
Christopher, thank you for having me.
In recent weeks, we've heard a lot about bariatric surgery and it's tied to diabetes, even curing it. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the field.
Well, there has been a lot of noise in the press, mainly on the New York Times, because of there were recently two articles published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a very prestigious journal in the medical world, whereby a study from the Cleveland Clinic and a study from Rome in Italy compare patients that underwent surgery with patients that had medical treatment for diabetes, and the numbers were impressive as far as curing diabetes before even weight loss happens.
And these, of course, the surgery wasn't to cure diabetes. It was almost a side effect, a good side effect of the surgery for people who are extremely obese.
Correct. These were studies that were done in morbidly obese patients, so patients that had a higher weight, and they required surgery for obesity. And of course, diabetes was associated to obesity. This was mainly type 2 diabetes.
How is this being received in the medical community? And is your phone starting to ring from people who are hearing about this with diabetes?
Well, we wish it were like that, but the medical community, we're talking primary care physicians, internal medicine doctors, and endocrinologists are the physicians that are basically managing these patients with prescribing the medications for them. Unfortunately, some of them are still reluctant to believe that surgery is the cure for diabetes. So we're working on it. It's a work in progress.
Not being a physician, maybe you can explain to our viewers who aren't physicians the tie between obesity and type 2 diabetes and why curing the obesity or beginning to cure the obesity has such a radical and very quick effect on diabetes.
Yes, of course. What happens with increased weight, there is more insulin resistance around the body. So as patients gain weight, they are not able to maintain their sugar levels low. So that's why they need to have either insulin or oral medications for treating their type 2 diabetes. Of course, by dropping the weight, these patients are able to basically normalize their sugars. What's amazing about these surgeries is that the diabetes is getting resolved even before the weight loss happens. So there is a metabolic effect. And this is not just for diabetes, it's for hypercholesterolemia, for hypertension, or any metabolic syndrome that is affecting this group of patients.
You said this is happening very quickly, even before the weight loss. So this really has to do, as you just said, with metabolism, and then once the weight loss goes, it becomes much more permanent? Correct.
That's exactly the way it happens. There are a group of hormones that play a role. So as soon as these surgeries are performed, certain areas of the patient's gut start taking a role, and other areas are not being used as much. And those hormones really play a role on how the patient's sugars are normalized.
And we're talking about type 2, not type 1 diabetes.
Correct, and that's important to differentiate because type 1 diabetics are patients that are a lot younger, and they can be obese as well. So for those patients, if they do happen to have a surgery for obesity, the surgery will help them control their diabetes, but it's very less likely it will resolve it completely.
Now, this is relatively new, but do we have any long-term forecasts? We see it resolved. Do we know long-term that it will remain resolved?
Well, I think these two studies didn't have long-term follow-up. One had 1 year follow-up and the other one had 2 years follow-up. But I think what's remarkable is exactly that in the short follow-up, all these metabolic problems, such as the ones we mentioned earlier, were resolved regardless of the procedure that the patients underwent, much better than they did with the medications alone. So in the future, I think these patients need to get, of course, lifestyle modifications in place, and that's what is going to do it for them long term.
This type of surgery now going on over at UMC, you said about 18 months.
Yes, correct. Fortunately, we were able to start this program in February last year, where we did our first procedure. Of course, we've been working on this for 6 months previous, because it takes a multidisciplinary team to treat this group of patients. These are not our regular gallbladder type of surgery patient. So we made sure that we had everything lined up before we did this first surgery, and we can tell that we successfully performed close to 90 surgeries since then.
All right. Well, Dr. Galvani, thank you so much for coming and talking about this, these two new studies.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Millions of people around the world are living with HIV or AIDS, and life has gotten much better for many of them thanks to new medication and social support. Tonight, we'll tell you about a Tucson group that has been around since 1994 and reaches out to communities of faith and volunteers to provide valuable services for local residents. Caitlin Harrington has that interview.
Joining me in studio today is Cheryl Muller and Roger Butch O'Daniel, both members of the Tucson Interfaith HIV and AIDS Network, or TIHAN. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Butch, tell me a little bit about how you first got involved with TIHAN.
In 2006, I was pretty sick, and my doctor recommended TIHAN as a support group for me. And they came over and started out by giving me rides to doctors' offices and taking me to the market. And since then, we've just grown together as a group.
And Cheryl, you are a member of TIHAN. It's broken into two parts. You have the care team members, and then you also have the care partners, and you are a care team member.
Correct.
Can you tell me how you first got involved with the organization and how the relationship between the two works out?
Sure. I first got involved basically because my husband had become a volunteer with TIHAN first as a care team member, and then he joined the board, and I could just see the value in it. So I joined as well, went through a volunteer orientation, and then had a care partner prior to Butch, and then got involved with Butch, and it's a great relationship. For me, I'm one of the people with Butch that really kind of takes him to the grocery store and does things like that, because we can do it outside of work hours. Because I work full time, I don't have the luxury often of being able to take him to doctor's appointments and such. But as Butch said, it's grown now into a family. Our care team is basically a family. We get together outside of what we do with TIHAN. We celebrate birthdays together, so it's a great experience.
We go out for dinners, we go to the movies, we just anything to get me out of the house so I can not sit at home and just be sick.
Butch, we talked prior to the interview about how the team has become like a family to you, but you also said it kind of brought you back to life.
It
so
did.
Tell me, going back 30 years, when you were first diagnosed, kind of where your mindset was at as compared to today.
30 years ago, I was told I was HIV positive, and I was told I had 2 years to live. Since then, I've had plenty of ups and downs, of course, with the progression of the disease. But in 2006, I was having a hip replacement surgery and a heart attack and kidney disease and hepatitis C all at once. And basically, I was just sitting at home waiting to die. And my doctor said that I needed a care team, and he arranged for TIHAN to come and pick me up and pick me up.
Cheryl, talk to us a little bit about, in addition to giving support to your care partners, You also raise money and do fundraisers, and you have a lot of really fun events that you do throughout the year. Can you tell us about some of your big events that you do every year?
Sure. We have one actually that's coming up this weekend on Sunday. It's Turnabout for TIHAN, and it's a lot of fun. It's basically a drag show that brings out a lot of people. Everything is always open to the public. Another big fundraiser that we have is in the spring, and it's Treasures for TIHAN. It's a silent auction where we have lots of donations, great items for people to come and bid on. And then throughout the year, there's a lot of smaller things that are always going on. There's concerts with Reveille, different concerts. We do dining with friends. There's just a lot of opportunities to get involved and to support TIHAN.
But for someone who may have been recently diagnosed or diagnosed at a time when you were, which was a really difficult time for HIV and AIDS, what would you say to those people who may have been in the same position as you where they've given up hope? You said you don't have to be a hermit.
Right. You don't. There are service organizations here in town that help so much, and they can, even if they can't help you directly, they can guide you to people who can. They have link specialists, they're called, and they can put you in towards the right direction, and it just helps so much to know that there are people behind you, people who will stand with you, and you don't have to feel alone.
Cheryl, for our viewers who may want to volunteer with the organization, can you let them know about your website?
Sure, it's real easy. It's tihan.org, so it's TIHAN.org, and there's lots of information there about how to get involved in a volunteer orientation, how to volunteer, what the other programs are that TIHAN supports, our education program. Just lots of information is available on the website.
Cheryl, I thank you so much for being here, and Butch, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks, Caitlin.
The Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year, and organizers chose today as a special occasion to commemorate the past and talk about the future. The museum is located on a 21-acre parcel west of Tucson, and it is known as one of the best zoos and botanical gardens in the country. Joining us to tell us more about this popular attraction are Executive Director Craig Galvani and Director Emeritus William Wooden. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Let's begin with you, Craig. So obviously a day full of activities, and what do you want to say about the fact that this has been around for 60 years now?
Well, I think one of the most amazing things is that somebody had that brain that thought of opening it on a dirt road 14 miles from town and opened a really unique facility that even today is a pioneer among zoos and aquariums and gardens across the country.
And we will talk about some of the highlights in a minute, but let's go to you now, Bill. You began as a volunteer back in the 1950s, and then you became the director of the facility.
Yes, I did. I went out there during the summer of 1952 as a volunteer, and the museum opened Labor Day that year. And I can remember wondering if anyone was going to come or what was going to happen. And we sat and watched the cars pour in. The roads were all dirt, so the valley was filled with dust, but people poured in, so it was very gratifying.
And then a couple of years later, you became the executive director for a few years.
For 17 years, yeah.
And what do you want to say about that experience?
Well, it was a wonderful experience. The museum was young then, and I wound up doing a lot of things that no director today would, I'm sure, would do. But we sort of jack of all trades. We had a small staff, but it was a wonderful experience watching the museum grow. And now, of course, it's unbelievably grown more. In fact, I always lose my way getting in there.
Mm-hmm. All right, Craig, and then today you launched the Keeper Interactions program. What is that all about?
Even though it's a wonderful place, sometimes people will be a little frustrated that they can't find an animal, or they say the animal isn't doing anything. And of course, desert animals, that's what they're largely about, is not doing a whole lot because they're avoiding desert heat, etc. But to do the kind of work we need to as far as animal keepers, feeding, training, doing enrichment activities, we're launching a program where actually those are going to be announced on the front patio, so when people come, they'll know where they should be at what time, so that they can actually see an animal that's interacting with the staff, and so it'll be a very rewarding experience.
And you are a herpetologist by training, Bill, but obviously you love all of the Sonoran Desert because it has so many unique features.
I do. I grew up in it. Been here for more than 80 years, and I love every aspect of it. My particular interest was snakes, but I've certainly grown to appreciate all aspects, including the rocks and minerals, the plants, and so forth. It's a fascinating place.
I'm sorry, and so what do you think one of the best things about the museum is for the average person who is not a scientist?
I think one of the best things is that it opens their eyes to the variety of life in this area, which is, being a desert is seldom seen because so much of it's nocturnal, but it just opens their eyes as to the great diversity of life here and tells them something about it.
And to illustrate that diversity, Craig, you are working right now in the Sea of Cortez and Freshwater Aquarium Gallery.
Yeah, towards the end of this year, we're going to open up what's called Rivers to the Sea. And ever since the organization began, they wanted to actually have a great focus on the Gulf of California, also known as the Sea of Cortez. What we're going to do is actually show the connection from the Colorado River all the way down into the Gulf. So there'll be freshwater tanks as well as marine, a lot of really neat animals, seahorses included. So that's going to be one of those things that I think people might wonder, what do you have an aquarium in the desert for? And what they may not realize is that without that sea, the monsoon that we see each year, the rains that come with that shift in wind patterns wouldn't exist. And so all of the great rainfall and the diversity of plants, it's all tied to the Gulf. So it's a really great way to be able to show the connection, not just physically, but also with things that we may not realize are connected.
And it is part of that larger overall Sonoran Desert region,
absolutely.
the ocean.
It's a vital part of the Sonoran Desert region.
And we also wanted to talk about the Baldwin Education Building Library. Craig, what's going on with that?
Well, we actually built that structure in 2007, and we had a visionary donor that came to us and wanted to start an art institute, which is bringing people to conservation through art. And because it's been so successful, we actually had to add a classroom, and we've also been fortunate enough to have them support building a state-of-the-art library. So we're actually having a wonderful time setting up and actually moving into the future with library and more classrooms and more classes.
And then, Bill, we were talking about the fact that this is such a rich and diverse desert, but what would you say to somebody who has never been to the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum? You've been here for decades, and you obviously spent a lot of time there.
Well, I would say that despite the name museum, everything is alive. That used to cause some confusion in the old days, perhaps it still does, but they soon realized with the first exhibit that this is truly a living museum. And museum was the one word we could come up with that encompassed everything that we were showing. It's more than a zoo. It's more than a botanical garden. It's more than a rock geology thing. It's a museum that encompasses everything in natural or living form.
Okay, and so Bill began as a volunteer, and Craig, so did you when you were attending the University of Arizona?
Yeah, that's correct. Oddly enough, we both started as volunteers. We both wind up being herpetologists. I was telling him earlier, it must be something in the water.
It must be.
And how important is it for the museum to have volunteers and people who go out there and spend some time for free?
Totally critical. Our staff consists of about 120 people, but we have over 500 volunteers. So from the day it began all the way through present day, it's critical to our success and to allow us to do the programs that we do, especially the ones that people are probably most familiar with, such as Raptor Free Flight and the docent program.
Okay, and then finally, Bill, if you could look ahead and plan for the future, what would you like to see at the museum in the next 10 to 20 to 30, 40 years?
I think more of the same. I think they're doing a wonderful job out there. And there are all kinds of new things we could do. As Craig mentioned, the Gulf of California is very important.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and congratulations on the 60th anniversary of the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
A tiny but popular bird in the Sonoran Desert may play a big role in revealing information about a growing concern for planet Earth. Scientists in southern Arizona are seeking clues about climate change from colorful and intriguing hummingbirds. Reporter Gisela Telles and photojournalist Martin Rubio have that story.
The hills over Sonoita Creek seem timeless, a place untouched by change. But, like the rest of the world, they're at the mercy of a shifting climate. To understand and prepare for what's to come, scientists are literally going to the birds.
Is to put the band number, the species, the age, and the sex, and Sonora Creek State Natural Area and the date on it, okay?
Dr. Susan Wethington has spent nearly a decade studying hummingbirds.
We can take it to the sunlight because this is a really dramatic looking bird.
There's a surprising amount that isn't known about them, she says, and a surprising amount they can tell us about changing forest and climate conditions. Wethington and her colleagues check in with migrating hummingbirds along their route from Mexico to Alaska to piece together the bigger picture.
Conservation is not looking at just one site, but what's happening to the viability of species survival. The goal is to have a network of sites that provide us the information that we need to identify the population trends of all western hummingbirds.
Like little flying laboratories, hummingbirds collect data as they go. The data is in the details, whether they survive and return to the same place, whether they breed successfully, and even how much they weigh.
It's amazing how a fat hummingbird can make a person happy. But what that means is that for these birds that are migrating and they overwinter in southwest Mexico, that they have the resources available to make the next jump and to get to their overwintering site.
The stats tell researchers how hummingbird habitat is changing and how well hummingbirds are adapting to that change.
Now, if the phenology, which is the timing of life history events, for example, when flowers bloom, is changing, well, hummingbirds have the ability to adjust to this change in time and modify their movement and migration timings to correspond with when their nectar is available. If not, that's a huge potential for a lot of die-off.
Black-tip? Yes, hummingbird. That's all I need to report to you at this point.
The Hummingbird Monitoring Network now spans 30 sites, from Mexico City to British Columbia.
Tail's fresh.
And it wouldn't be possible, Wethington says, without volunteers.
I don't know. I suppose I've handled close to 1,000 of them now over the years.
Jim Lockwood has volunteered in the state park system for 9 years and has trapped hummingbirds for 4. He wakes up at 3 a.m. and travels 22 miles to play his part in hummingbird science.
Well, they aren't really as fragile as they look, fortunately. Otherwise, we could never catch them. So we have to be aware, but you have to have very soft hands to do it. And I've been fortunate. I've been able to do it.
Wethington's other partner in the project is the Arizona State Park system, and that's where some of her challenges lie. Budget cuts that slashed 75% of state park staff have put the project at a disadvantage. Robert Cassavant, manager of State Parks Science and Research Programs, explains.
It's limited, quite limited by the number of staff we have. We had 2 other sites that we were going to be doing this program, one at Boyce Thompson Arboretum and another one at Alamo Lake or Dead Horse. Both of those had to be abandoned because we don't have staff. We have no more staff to continue the research in those 2 locations except for just this. And this is in jeopardy too. Keep in mind we only have 3 state natural areas, one Verde River Greenbelt, this Sonora Creek State Natural Area, and the San Rafael. 2 of the 3 are closed at this time. So that's how dire the budget situation is for state parks.
Length of the wing is 50.
For now, Wethington and her band of park staff and volunteers are doing what they can to keep the project alive. They will stay on until the days cool and the birds fly south. And they'll be waiting for them again next spring, hoping for the answers they need to keep hummingbirds and their habitat from vanishing.
Away it goes.
In tonight's video postcard from photojournalist Robert Lindbergh, we learn about renowned Tucson photographer Jack Daikinga and the process he uses to capture amazing images. You can get more news and information on our website, azpm.org. To comment on any story you saw tonight, click on it online and go to the bottom. We can also be reached via Facebook and Twitter. Coming up tomorrow night, we are scheduled to have special PBS coverage of the National Democratic Convention in North Carolina. It is being held 1 week after the Republican Party held its event in Tampa and will intensify the presidential race this fall. I'm Tony Paniagua from all of us at Arizona Public Media. Have a great night.